A report of a teenage Indigenous girl being sexually assaulted by a relative that supposedly was never prosecuted. What ends up happening? This girl, Emily Pike, vanishes from her Arizona group home, only to later be found dismembered and stuffed into trash bags. I'm going to break down the latest bombshell details of this tragic case, from the allegation of sexual assault to an escape that turned deadly. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, we have an update on a story that we covered a few weeks back. On January 27th, 14-year-old Emily Pike vanished from a Mesa, Arizona group home. And according to a report from Mesa police, the group home manager called police and reported that, quote, Emily left out of her bedroom window and has not returned. The window screen was pushed out from the inside. And the thing about that is, it was actually a familiar scene because, according to police, Emily had run away before, only this time she wouldn't come back. According to police reports, Emily had a pattern of running away from Sacred Journey, Inc., the Mesa group home where Tribal Social Services from San Carlos Apache Reservation had placed her. And the group home manager, Kaye Montano, told police that Emily had fled multiple times, including to nearby Fitch Park, but officers didn't find any trace of her that night. Emily's last known outfit, this pink and gray shirt, was noted in the file. She also had no cell phone, no means of calling for help. And then on February 19th, the case took a grim turn. Bureau of Indian Affairs agent contacted Mesa police reporting a Jane Doe was found on the Gila County Reservation who matched Emily's description. And the agent requested contact with homicide detectives. And it turns out hikers had stumbled upon something absolutely horrific. Trash bags with what appeared to be human remains inside. Authorities later confirmed that this dismembered body was in fact Emily. The report states she was positively identified by Gila County Sheriff's Office as a homicide victim. And by the way, this is not only a horrible, horrible case, but it also further highlights this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And there are a lot of troubling gaps in this investigation too. For one, according to police reports, a social worker disclosed Emily was on medication for, quote, behavioral issues. Didn't provide any further information. 2, an anonymous tip came in claiming that Emily was with her mother on the reservation, but a tribal case manager confirmed that Emily wasn't there. 3, a statewide missing person bulletin wasn't issued until 4 days after she disappeared. And as investigators dug deeper, there was something else that was particularly troubling and disturbing, something that we're going to get into here today. And that is that apparently Emily had been found long before her death. At least that's what an argument is being made right now. Emily's story doesn't begin with her disappearance. It apparently now begins with an alleged sexual assault in 2023 when she was just 13 years old. So before we go any further, I want to bring on a couple special guests, people who know this case backwards and forwards. 2 gentlemen, Justin Shepard, known online as JustinTheNickofCrime. You can check out his wildly popular YouTube channel, as well as a reporter for the Arizona Republic who has been all over this case, Robert Anglen. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time. Robert, I'm going to start with you. Before we get into the allegation of sexual assault, through your reporting, what are the biggest gaps you're seeing, whether it's in announcing Emily was missing, the investigation into her death, maybe ignoring warning signs, generally speaking?
What we found is that the group home was actually operating fairly successfully and following most of the requirements. There weren't holes at the group home. In terms of gaps in the investigation, it's really how Emily was failed for years by virtually everyone who came in contact with her at the tribal level. There just wasn't any oversight, and she was forgotten in the system. Family didn't know what was happening to her. Her friends didn't know what was happening to her. They knew she'd been removed from the house, her own home on the San Carlos Apache Reservation. But that's as much as they knew. And what she was going through was a spiral. The last 18 months of her life were a horror show.
Any idea, Robert, why it took, 4 days for a statewide bulletin? We're wondering what the coordination was between Mesa PD and tribal authorities. What was going on here?
Because she was a runaway, because she had a history of runaway, there isn't a requirement for an Amber Alert to go out. Police, in fact, what we found was that kids from group homes run away all the time. This group home in a 3-year period had 30 kids who had run away. Well, there were 30 reports of runaways. They were 18 kids, of which Emily made up 4 of those instances. And because it happens so frequently, there is no state law that requires a bulletin to go out or a missing persons alert. She was reported missing. Police began investigating, but that's as far as it went.
So look, I think it's pretty fair to say that our content shows how important personal safety is, right? And I think that is especially true when it comes to protecting your online privacy, because you would be shocked at how much of your personal information is out there, like your address, your phone number. Do you ever wonder why you get so many spam calls and emails? That's because that information is all public. But that is where our sponsor, Incogni, comes in. This is a service that helps you take control of your online privacy by removing your personal data from data brokers, the huge companies that sell and trade your information without your permission. Incogni found so many data brokers with my information, but here's the kicker. These data brokers have to remove you from their database if you ask them to. And now you might be saying, I don't have time to just call everybody up. Well, that's where Incogni comes in. They contact these companies for you to get your online safety back. You don't have to do a thing, and then they alert you after the request has been completed. So I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. And right now, anybody who uses code SIDEBAR at Incogni.com/sidebar gets 60% off. That's code SIDEBAR at Incogni.com/sidebar for 60% off of an annual Incogni plan. Robert, has there been any pushback from law enforcement, group home, tribal services regarding your reporting, putting a spotlight on what happened to Emily?
No, the contrary. In fact, the only pushback has come from the tribe itself, and tribal leaders still will not talk about what happened there. Initially, tribal leaders really tried to point a finger of blame at the group home. They called for increased scrutiny. They called for a state investigation into regulations of group homes. But they did all that in the vacuum without explaining what Emily had gone through in the past 18 months.
And it raises a larger question. And Justin, I'm going to bring you in. We talked about this previously because I said this. It highlights this epidemic of missing, murdered Indigenous women. And one of the reasons you and I had spoke, you were the one who told me about this case, because it didn't reach the national stage. And that's the question I have. Why do you think this is a story that is not getting the national attention that it deserves?
Well, I don't really know the answer to that. You know, it's one of those things that whenever you see somebody who has maybe a darker complexion and it just is what it is, people scroll by that. You know, social media right now is one of the biggest ways that news spreads. You know, for example, a major event occurs, I post a video, and within an hour, maybe less depending on the event, it's at hundreds of thousands of views. People tend to just scroll by when it's somebody who is missing or a story about somebody who was brutally murdered, that you need to bring awareness to this if they are a person of color or of a darker complexion. And there's not a good reason as to why that happens. It doesn't matter how many people create those videos, how many people create those stories, they continue to be just scrolled right past. Now, with Emily's story in particular, it's garnered a little bit more steam on social media than a lot of other cases. And I think part of that is because of, number one, the brutality of it, also her age. But when it came to her specifically, it really started blowing up with the Indigenous creators more so than your more mainstream creators. And it wasn't until, I started covering it and encouraging other creators to start covering it. You have the family of Gabby Petito talking about it, which obviously brings a little bit more awareness to it, because when they talk, people listen. But it really is a struggle that we as creators are hard pressed to overcome. And I know that even in mainstream media, it's hard to get people's attention when it comes to somebody like that. And I don't know how to really change that narrative.
It's a shame. It's a problem. I mean, there's no other way to explain it. And I wonder, with what we're about to talk about, this allegation of sexual assault from 2023, if this changes everything. So Robert, or this brings more attention to it. So Robert, talk to us about what we know of this allegation of sexual assault from 2023.
In the summer of 2023, there was a call from a hill behind Emily's house. Her relatives believe she made the call, and authorities found her in the aftermath of a sexual assault without a shirt on. Her relatives say she was battered. She was able to identify her attacker as a relative, someone who lived at her house and had come and gone from her house. But the responding agency was not police. The responding agency was not tribal police. It was tribal game and fish. That's not who you would typically expect to respond to a sexual assault 911 call, but that's what happened here. And they became the lead investigating agency. And as you can imagine, the case spiraled downward from there.
Why? Why were they the agency that was overseeing this? Why did tribal police not get involved in this? Is there a jurisdictional issue of some kind?
No, but it's a good question and one we can't get answered.
And this alleged assailant, any idea what transpired, who this was, why they were never charged?
We've identified the suspect, but we're not naming him. And he was arrested, apparently spent a couple of days in jail. When the next tribal agency became involved, that would be the tribal prosecutors. And they made a decision not to charge this person in Emily's sexual assault. We have no records to explain why. Nobody from the tribe will talk about why. And so they dropped the case against him, released him from custody, and that is where Emily's suicides began, the suicide attempts.
Before we get into that, Robert, let me just ask you, set the record straight. Is there any evidence based on your reporting, your investigation, that ties this allegation of sexual assault into what happened to Emily, her death?
Not directly. I've interviewed the Gila County Sheriff's Office, and they say they are aware of the sexual assault report. They've reviewed it. They have it. They have looked into the person in that who was charged and released, or who was not charged and released, arrested and released. And they say they don't have a suspect right now. They don't have a person of interest, and there's nothing suggesting yet that he may have been involved in her murder, but they haven't ruled him out.
Justin, what are your thoughts on this after what we just talked about, 5 minutes ago, about perhaps how these cases are treated differently? This is odd. This is weird.
It is odd. And the other thing that I notice is, typically speaking, when you have crimes committed against Indigenous girls and Indigenous women, it's usually people coming onto the tribal land who aren't normally there, committing these and then going off the tribal land, the reservation. And because that's how it typically goes, there becomes jurisdictional issues like, should it be tribal police? Should it be the FBI? Should it be local police in the area? And this seems pretty cut and dry. This happened, according to what we know, by a relative of Emily. It happened on tribal land. It was investigated. I use the term police very loosely in this because it was fish and game, which makes no sense to me. And it's just one of the many, many failures that we seem to see when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women or crimes against women that happen on reservations, that there's never follow through. They're not as important. And I realize that there's partial budget issues. There's a lot of things that go into it, but this seems pretty obvious. You have evidence there. If she made the call herself or was willing to interview, somebody was arrested just to let him go with no reason. It makes no sense to me. And perhaps, and last thing I might say, without maybe jumping to a conclusion here, maybe had the justice system not failed her, maybe she wouldn't have felt that she needed to take her own life or run away or get in the situation that she ended up getting herself into.
And let me just couple that, Justin, with something that you said to me in our last broadcast that I want you to reiterate. In the cases that are actually solved, because a lot of these go unsolved, but in the ones that are actually investigated, there's an arrest, there's a prosecution, is it typically, and again, I'm not making assertions about what happened here to Emily, but is it typically committed by somebody who knows the victim, or is it completely random?
I can't remember my stats on that. I did have that, but I think that it's typically it's somebody that they know, but typically it's because those people are on that reservation. So even if it's not typically somebody that is within the Native American community, the Indigenous community, it's somebody that's coming in who has garnered trust with the people who live on the reservation, and they might be there temporarily for work or what have you, and then do what they need to do there. They commit their assaults and they leave, and there's really no repercussion.
That's the scary part that I was left with. And now, by the way, so the department's director never answered a lot of these questions. And after Arizona Republic reporters reached out to inquire what's going on here, the tribe announced, as we were talking about, on April 14th, that it would conduct its own investigation. A statement from the tribe reads, the tribe is now addressing serious concerns about the handling of assault charges Emily Pike made in 2023. Questions have arisen regarding why the alleged assailant was not prosecuted and why the tribe's police and specialized law enforcement officers were excluded from the investigation. But Robert, you brought something up. that this had a big effect on Emily, right?
It did. And before we even go there, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, the axiom of homicide is that most people know they're killers, but there's a lot of circumstances about where her body was found that takes us back to the reservation. She was found off Highway 60 north of Globe, the 2 trash bags, which is about, as a crow flies, 20 miles from the reservation and about 100 miles from her group home. The group home owner has talked to me and said she really wanted to get back home. So taking that into consideration, it appears she may have gotten close or may have even gotten back to the reservation, and then she was disposed of off the Highway 60, which is, I've been to the site. It does not appear to be a random site that somebody just drove by and picked it for no reason. The other staggering thing about the body, if dismemberment isn't enough, her arms and hands cannot be found.
Yeah, and we talked about that. These are, and unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we see those are, elements to identify somebody. So you wonder if that, fingerprints, things like that. But Robert, I mean, this is from the reporting. Emily was once a bright, artistic girl, dreamed of college. But after this alleged assault in 2023, her life took a turn, right? She became different, right, Robert?
She did, drastically different. And even before she got to, she was taken and moved to the group home, removed from her mother's custody. Her father's in prison. They're split. The mother has addiction issues, according to relatives. So they removed her from that home for her safety and put her in a group home in August of the Sacred Journey that you mentioned. Even before she got there, she had a history of self-harm and suicide attempts. She tried to hang herself. She was cutting her wrists. And that behavior continued dramatically along with the runaways. From there, she became sullen, withdrawn. She was very quiet, soft-spoken, but she had this defiance about her. So if you told her to do something she didn't want to do, she would cry, she would resist. And that wasn't the way relatives who knew her remembered her.
And Justin, she hated that group home. I mean, based upon the reports, right? She had a difficult time there.
I mean, I don't think anybody really wants to be in a group home, but yeah, she ran away 4 times, what we know of. And we know that particular home, has had 30 runaway events that have been reported. And I mean, again, we don't know what's going on in that home, but at the same time, what kid wants to be there? If you're in a situation that you've been put in a group home, whatever's going on in your life is not good. And especially when you're at a very vulnerable age, it can look even worse.
And Robert, my understanding is Emily's relatives told the Arizona Republic they didn't know about this assault. They thought she might have been removed from the home due to her mother's struggles with addiction, or reported struggles with addiction. There was an effort to adopt her, right? What happened there, Robert?
Yeah, her uncle, her grandmother, her aunts all had no idea that she'd been sexually assaulted. In fact, they only learned about it after her death. The family went up to the site where her body was found. They were sitting on the side of the road when a game and fish officer apparently drove up and told her he was the one who investigated the sexual assault and briefed them, ran them through what had happened to her in 2023. They were shocked. But it helped explain what happened during this adoption attempt, which was, and to do that, you have to go back to her first suicide attempt that we know of at the group home. In November of 2023, she tried to hang herself from a doorknob with a shoelace. A staff worker found her in a closet. Her wrists were cut again, and they called police. She was hospitalized. And 3 weeks after that, her aunts wanted to adopt her. They knew she was in this home. They had no idea what she was going through. But they went to adopt her, and part of that was taking her to see other relatives. This is a very large extended family. They were going to take her to Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado for a Thanksgiving holiday, and she was going to meet different relatives, and they were going to show her the house where she might end up living in near Fort Collins, Colorado. And everything seemed to be going well, except that they had taken her shopping, and she wanted to buy makeup. And Emily really loved makeup. And when they told her no, she bolted and ran out into a storm, a Rocky Mountain storm, 18-degree weather. Nobody could find her. They thought the worst. And finally, they located her and called police. There was a search. They found her inside some kind of trampoline arena, and she didn't want to go to the car. And on the way to the car, so they basically forced her. They lifted her up, told her she had to walk to the car. As they were walking to the car, she reached for a police officer's gun and said she wanted to die, that her whole family would go to hell, and she would see them there. And that stopped the adoption in its tracks. And the aunt who was involved in all of this was just devastated. She had no idea. Emily was hospitalized in Colorado, and the owner of the Arizona group home is actually who came to get her, because the family couldn't get a hold of anybody with tribal social services at the time.
And she went back to that. She went back to that group home, Justin. And my understanding is on January 27th is when she apparently climbed out of that bedroom window that last time. And the reporting indicates that she was trying to see her mother. Right? I mean, what do we know about her relationship with her mother and maybe the need to see her mother? This is again before, 3 weeks later, her remains were found in trash bags.
Well, it seems, based on what we know, that her mother was a bit troubled, possible substance addiction. But, you're talking about a 13, 14-year-old girl, and she's going to love her mom. That's going to be her rock. That's the person that's always been there. So even if she's a troubled person, I know I'm making a lot of assumptions here, even if she's a troubled person, that's going to be the person that she still expects to see. That's going to be that constant, even if she's not the healthiest person for them. It's struggling for me to not really have the information like why she would want to go back there, because we know that this alleged assault took place by a relative that could have been in that home at one point. Is she going back while that person's there or not? There's a lot of what ifs or unknowns, but to me it just seems like this is a scared little girl going back to the one person who's always been there no matter what, even if it's not been in the best capacity.
Justin, you talk about what the response has been. I want to talk about this with you. So the aftermath basically saw Emily's face become a powerful symbol. There are the red handprint protests, the mural covering a water tower. What are you seeing from the response online? Have there been any campaigns online on social media? I know the tribe is pushing for Emily's Law to strengthen oversight of group homes. And there's this, and for an Indigenous missing persons alert system. What is the response you're seeing from the public and online?
Well, so online, there really hasn't been much lately because there's been no developments in the case. The biggest challenge is that to keep people interested, you have to continue to give them developments. That's why some of these cases are able to go on as long as they can. Now, with this article that was just written, we can do an update with that and get people back in. But I have had a lot of people come up saying, you should cover Emily Pike. And I'm like, well, I have been covering Emily Pike. Here's all the videos. This is where you can go see them. But I appreciate you having interest in this. So it seems to me that more people are realizing that there are some racial disparities when it comes to the way that people who are of darker complexion, people of color, Indigenous people are covered and are becoming more attuned to that and wanting to see more of that. It's just a matter of getting it to an even larger scale. So that's kind of where it's at now. I do think that with the article that you wrote, that we're able to take that and talk about it and do that maybe in a couple different parts, and maybe we can get some more momentum, because I agree, things need to change. One of the biggest problems, going back to what we were talking about earlier, when you talk about the legalities of this, maybe not necessarily in the sexual assault of Emily in this particular case, where we see the system fail her and it not really getting the attention and investigation that it deserves. But when you talk about the people that come onto tribal land and leave tribal land, there is a big gap, a giant hole on the way that this can be investigated, which is where pieces of it get lost along the way. And that's something that I think that we really need to start bringing a lot of attention to, because that's a huge disconnect.
And it's a great point. It's 100% true. And let me end on this. I'll go back to Robert on this. So the San Carlos Apache tribe has offered a $75,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest of Emily's killer or killers. Tribal leaders, they've promised this independent investigation. Emily's uncle Allred Pike Jr. told the Republic that he was skeptical, saying everyone let that girl down. The system failed her in all aspects, not one, not two, all of it. She's just a 14-year-old that maybe wanted to see some friends, wanted to come home. And anybody with information is urged to contact the Gillett County Sheriff's Office or San Carlos Apache Police. Where do we currently sit with the investigation, Robert? And do you have any hope in the investigation?
Well, I think there's a task force involving Gila County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, tribal police, and Mesa Police, and those officers seem committed to finding out what happened. The status of the investigation, what they're focusing on right now, they say, is trying to determine who put Emily's body on the side of Highway 60. If they can do that, they can determine where she was killed, who put her there, and then, of course, that drives back to who did it. And there seems to be, those officers are working day and night to figure it out. As for her desire to get back home, I did want to add that by all accounts, it wasn't just that she needed to see her mom. She believed that she could take care of her mom. She believed that her mom needed her care, that she was worried about her care. And so you have this 14-year-old telling everybody she has to get back home to make sure her mom's okay.
Yeah, let me just say, Emily seemed like such a special girl who was put in such unfortunate circumstances, and it is just a tragedy on so many different levels, and hopefully we get some answers as to what happened to her, because the public and the family needs to know what happened to her. Robert Anglen, great reporting. Thank you so much for coming on. Justin Shepard, really, really appreciate it, and thank you for bringing awareness and attention to this case. Lucky to have you both here on the program. Thanks so much. All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.